What are the key drivers behind the emerging monetization models? What can we learn from the rise of NFTs? How does digitalization impact business strategies? Our global economy is changing faster than ever before. What are the key drivers of this transformation? There are new challenges and opportunities. Make the most of them. Adapt your business and stay ahead of the game. It's time to rethink monetization models.
So here we are once again. It's all about the digital economy. If that's what you're after, if that's what you're looking for and interested in, you're in the right place, definitely. So what are the key drivers behind the new emerging monetization models? I can't answer that for you, but I know somebody who can. The next gentleman who's going to appear on our screens, he'll be able to answer that question and naturally many others as well. So I'm going to introduce to you now from the USA, Silicon Valley Blockchain Society, Mr. Amit Pradhan. Amit, I can see you. Can I hear you? Are you there? I can right, I can see you. I just can't hear you. Maybe others can hear you. We'll just check. We'll just check. Say something else for me, Amit.
Yeah, let me
Wonderful.
know if you can hear me.
We made it.
Yeah.
We're together. We made it. I'm here in Maribor in Slovenia. Where are you exactly right now?
I am currently in Zurich, but normally based in San Francisco.
Okay, so you're closer than we originally thought. Fantastic. Okay, right. Listen, the floor is yours. Over to you, and intrigued to really hear what you really have to say.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. You know, we live in very interesting times, to say the very least, and the most interesting part of these times is the evolution of how we can all think about making money. And that brings us to new monetization models. But I think it's really important when we think about what the future presents us to go back and understand where we came from. The past is always a great indicator of how we'll evolve into the future. And I'll take you back quite a bit into the past. If we go back to 1450, that is when the Gutenberg printing press was invented. And if you think about how many books were printed and distributed in the first 50 years since the invention, it's a staggering 20 million books. Now, what was really interesting about this is that it was the first time in human history that the concept of literature, the concept of knowledge, the concept of education that was once a privilege of royalty and kings and princes now became available to people, the commons. Fast forward about 500 years later, and that was the initiation of what we now call the internet, when DARPA started rolling out initial versions of TCP/IP. It took just 10 years for 1 billion people to get connected. And what that did was that it democratized access to information. And if you fast forward, what are we, 12 years now since the Bitcoin white paper that Satoshi wrote, 65 million people around the world have become owners of at least one cryptocurrency. That is an incredibly large number of people to own a currency that is not issued by a sovereign nation. What that has done is it has democratized the economy, because never before in the history of the world at such a mainstream level were people able, the commons were able to create their own currency, right? And regardless of where we stand on where the market is today and what Elon did or didn't do, and frankly, as much as the numbers seem to bear relevance, there's two words that I think of when I think of Elon's behavior and assessment in the markets moving. Who cares, right? Because if you look as far as your nose, everybody cares. And if we stop looking as far as just our noses and we start looking into the future, the foundations that have been laid, when you ignore the silly hype cycles that come and go, the foundations that have been laid, that were laid in the 1990s with TCP/IP and the internet, and we had the dot-com bust, and we had all of the drama that came with that. It still built the foundations of the world that we live in today. And so, with great confidence, I look at what's happening with the market today, and I can say, ignore the hype, ignore what happens with the tweets. We are building a foundation that's built on a very interesting philosophical basis. Now, what is that philosophical basis? I'll take you to 5 events that we have all seen and talked about in the past recent future of only 5 years. One, Bitcoin. I call Bitcoin a solution movement. Two, DeFi. DeFi, I call again a solution movement. Three, Greta Thunberg's climate revolution, because it's a generational revolution. I call that a protest movement. Black Lives Matter. This is not just about Black lives. This is an equality movement that began the unfortunate murder of a Black individual in the United States, but spread around the world. Protest movement. And finally, look at Wall Street Bets. Wall Street Bets, again, is a protest movement. And if you think about what's in common with these 5 movements, they're all separate vectors of the same commons revolution, the people's revolution. There wasn't a single organization behind any of these, right? And these are evolving. They grew over time. They got people inspired. They got people motivated. But where did this come from? And this comes to the philosophical underpinnings of the blockchain, the philosophical underpinnings of tokenization and the subject at hand, which is monetization. If you go back to the oldest developers in the decentralized world, not by age, but by amount of time they spent, they come from Eastern Europe, they come from Argentina, they come from Venezuela. They don't come from Silicon Valley or Berlin or Crypto Valley here in Switzerland. And what's in common with those 3 regions? What is in common with them is that one has had largely an authoritarian regime or regimes. The second, hyperinflation, collapsing currencies. And the third, in the case of Venezuela, a completely destroyed economy with extreme hyperinflation. Bottom line, talented young people, like all of you in the audience today, felt this incredible helplessness of not being able to control their destinies and their freedoms because they cannot control the economy, which is controlled by currency. Those are the underpinnings of the world that we're living in today. And the reason that I am so optimistic that regardless of whether Elon tweets something, depending upon what mood he's in or what substance he's on, it doesn't matter. Perhaps in the short term, but what this is all unlocking for us are foundations and pillars of the future and future monetization models that we will unpack and talk about in great detail with everyone on the panel that we will follow with right now. There's another important aspect about this, and that this revolution, the commons revolution, is not just a single-sided revolution. On one hand, what we've seen with the unlocking of the NFT space, because people sold a $69.5 million piece of art to a single investor, is that it unlocked the idea that we can have a creator's economy, a creator's revolution, and that can be democratized as well. So a creator doesn't have to be a household famous name who gets to put her paintings or her art in a gallery where the threshold point of entry is as high as it is, And now suddenly anyone can be a creator, especially if that anyone has special talent. But there's the other side. It's the democratization of who can invest in this talent, who can invest in the art that gets produced. Because it's not always just a monetary recognition of that art. Sometimes, and more often than not, now in the world that we live, we are able to invest our values. We are able to invest because we believe in art from LGBTQ artists. We can invest in art because we believe in equality, and we believe in people of color, and we believe in women artists. We can also invest because we're investing in protest movements and art that represents those protest movements. These are two sides of the equation, and both sides now are starting to get democratized. And that is what gets really interesting, because that highlights this concept of the Commons Revolution. It's not limited to art. We are now starting to go down the premise that modern society that was built on the premise that human life is valued based upon physical land that we inhabit, and all the problems that come with that, because 95% of the world's population, or the world's land, is owned by only 5% of the world's population. That all of the resources that tie us to that land are finite resources and create a scarcity mindset, and we fight wars, whether we use weapons or we use commerce. Centralized forces fighting wars with other centralized forces, while the commons in all of these countries suffer because of these wars, economic or weaponized, right? We're starting to see this change where a postmodern society will value human life not based on the physical land that we inhabit, but the digital land that we inhabit. And the digital land has just one resource. It's not oil or toil, it is data. And data can represent art, but data can represent a whole slew of other value. And the ability to create sovereignty for us as humans, so that that data can be in our agency and we get to decide what to do with it, including for it to be monetized, and monetized in a responsible way that protects our privacy. But at the end of the day, creates an opportunity for investors to invest in the individual value that human beings have in this digital world, as well as to invest in the opportunities that come from that data. Like art, data is going to be an intrinsic part of the future of society and all of the monetization models that we can unlock there. And all of this is going to start getting enveloped slowly, and this is very painful, but surely in a regulatory framework that makes sense for the opportunities, the platforms, and especially this idea that centralized powers cannot determine alone what is best for their populace. That the Commons Revolution is a responsible revolution, even if it at times has anarchic rules built in. This has been an incredibly responsible revolution. If you go back to all of the 5 inflection points that I mentioned, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's DeFi, whether it is Black Lives Matter, the climate revolution, or Wall Street bets, and now we're seeing the opportunities around NFTs. These are, in my view, responsible revolutions. They were not overnight, they took time, and therefore they will take time to evolve. And in that is where we have to show both responsibility and patience, but at the same time, we are sitting right now in an incredible ocean of opportunity. I'll end before we walk into our very interesting panel with the experts who are going to join us, with this beautiful quote by Buckminster Fuller. We are called to be the architects of the future, not its victims. And this commons revolution is already just for that. And the monetization models that we'll be able to drive into and drive through are going to help us unlock just that ability to be the architects of the future we want, not the complaining victims. Thank you very much for your attention. But now we're going to go into something that is going to be far more interesting than the last 10 minutes of having to listen to me. So I would love to now introduce our panel that is going to join me to talk about new monetization models. And I will start by introducing Bernadine Brocker-Wieder. Hello, Bernadine.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Wonderful. So Bernadine is the co-founder and CEO of Vastari, based in the UK. And Bernadine, I'm going to quickly introduce everyone else, and then I'm going to come back and ask you to take a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about your background and about Vastari as well. Next up, we have Greg Kidd. Greg is the co-founder and CEO of Global ID. Greg, I believe you're based in the US, and I'm going to come back to you and ask you to introduce yourself as well. Then we move on to my friend Günther Dubraus, who is based here in Zurich-ish. Günther is a partner and leader with PwC Legal in Switzerland. And last but not the least, the man with the bandana-ish, Jason Bailey. Jason is the founder and CEO of Artnome, and he is also based in the US. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Can't wait to unlock this conversation that honestly is more interesting than it's ever been before. So Bernadine, coming to you first. Why don't you take a couple of minutes and tell us a little bit about your background, Vastari, and how you got here?
Thank you so much. And I actually love that you started with the story about the printing press, because Vastari is actually named after Giorgio Vasari, who was by some accounts the first art historian who wrote a book about artists in Italian rather than Latin and published it widely. And it was in order for people to learn about the Italian Renaissance artists, as well as some from Northern Europe. And I would argue that the fact that he decided to write in the vernacular and make the stories about the artists something that could really identify with the general public is the reason that, for example, the Ninja Turtles are still named after Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, and Raphael today. So it's really important to engage with what you said, the general public. And our company, Vastari, what we set up, the idea is 9 years old. We've been working with collectors of art from around the world and museums. What we saw was that museums usually borrow works from the same collectors because they curate their exhibitions based on word of mouth. And what we did was we built an online platform where anyone can connect with museums about their upcoming exhibitions and lend their pieces to those museums. And then we also help museums in new geographies connect with museums for touring exhibitions as well. And by what related to monetization, we created more transparency in what the economics were behind these transactions, because it was always something that was done behind closed doors. And we believe that it should be more transparent. How do you collaborate with the Tate in London? And how do you lend a piece to a museum exhibition? That's what we set out to disrupt.
Wonderful. Glad that you're doing this. Obviously, you've come with a very distinguished background in the space, and we're very pleased to have you work on this as Bernadine and as Vastari, and also join us today. Greg, moving on to you, a quick little background, and then tell us about the company.
Sure. I'm Greg Kidd, CEO of Global ID. Has a very simple premise. Everybody should have an identity, basically a name, just like you have a handle on Twitter or Skype. And that namespace, just like DNS for the World Wide Web, is global. There's not a Chinese internet and a Brazilian internet. The concept is that namespace would be global as well. You can have more than one name, but no two people or groups can have the same name. And with that name, that is what you sign for when you're signing a ledger that might own some new piece of art that's represented in an NFT or physical assets or anything else. And that this name does not belong to a company. It does not belong to a country. It belongs to yourselves. My background is I came up through sort of the usual management consulting work, but I worked as a central banker at the Federal Reserve, at the board. We run the ACH and the wire transfer system. It's a big system, but it's just another silo. And so as we look at the world of silos, whether it's WeChat and Facebook, or back in the day, America Online or CompuServe, all of those silos, it was kind of the Highlander model, one sword to rule them all, but you could never kill everyone else and turn it all into your system. And so we lived in a world of interoperability, trapped in the various silos. And so our question at the protocol level is, what is the form of identity that would work with these new levels of monetization so that everything is interoperable? And we're committed to inclusion, which means everyone has a seat at the table, which means an identity that can hold value. Think of it as your bundle of sticks, whether it's credentials, your messages, your money, or your things. They all belong to you and they go with you, and they ought to be exchangeable. Communist or capitalist, we all live in an exchange society with one another. And so we're dedicated in a neutral way to the promotion of that protocol in a practical, not academic manner. That's Global ID in a nutshell. Thanks.
Wonderful, Greg. Welcome, and more importantly, welcome to the light side. An ex-central banker. That's wonderful. Gunther, it's lovely to see you again. You know, you do a lot of very interesting, important work, including sometimes fixing things for initiatives that do important work. But tell us a little bit about your background and the work that you do with PwC and in the space in general.
Sure. Well, super happy to be here and great to share this panel, obviously, which is amazing. So I personally came up from the venture capital world. I was one of the initiators of what must have been one of the first venture funds in Switzerland, really focusing on what today would probably be disruptive innovations. And we had a great time doing that. And after a couple of years, I basically had to make a change and ended up being where I never ever wanted to be. And that was at PwC, right? It's like the big four. There was like everything against my dream. And like I couldn't imagine that. But at the time, PwC was really thinking about expanding its legal offering, but obviously not by trading just another law firm, but really to focus on some elements. So I basically started there and brought things together in a kind of unique way. But anyway, I think that's not the topic here today. One of the reasons I guess I have been invited is that we are currently working on a lot of projects out there. We're just about to launch some NFT projects with some very famous US artists via Switzerland. It's going to be quite interesting. And there is a lot of other stuff coming in as well. So this, on the one hand, this is music, but on the other hand, we're also working on kind of disrupting a bit of the classical art market.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you for being here. We genuinely appreciate your time. Jason, tell us a little bit about you and your story.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Amit. So yeah, I have only ever wanted to be an artist. I grew up in a family of engineers where my dad was an engineer, my older brother was an engineer, my younger brother was an engineer, and I was totally the black sheep. So I went and studied sculpture and painting and printmaking and graduated in the early 2000s and realized that there's not a lot of opportunities out there for art. I think, art's really important, and we, kind of flock to museums on the weekends. We talk a good game about how we care about the arts, but really do a lousy job of supporting artists. So I ended up going into the family trade and worked 20 years in tech, more on the marketing and design side. And eventually started this blog, I guess 5 or 6 years ago, Art Gnome, where I started writing about the intersection of art and technology and thinking about, as a failed artist, how can we use technology to build an entirely new art world? If we just kind of started from scratch and thought about how we might be able to sort of build new systems. And in my research, I realized just how stacked against most people the old system was, right? So if you weren't born in certain areas of the world, or the right color, or the right gender, your chances of success were almost zero, right? So about 4 years ago, late 2017, early 2018, I was one of the first people to really write about how blockchain and NFTs could actually change and build a new system that could be more equitable for artists. And it's been exciting to watch in the last month or two how NFTs have kind of captured, people's imaginations and the press. But I worry that when people look at, a sale like a $70 million sale from Beeple from a 200-year-old auction house, they think, well, this is just more of the same, isn't it? Because it tends to look like that. My point is that the community, which I'm very much a part of, that's been working very hard for 4 years, has really built this untold story or lesser told story of the first global art movement where people born in Nigeria or Mexico or all over the world can actually, sort of start without any permission or authority or intermediary and build an incredible career being paid and rewarded for their creativity. So the last thing I think I'll say is, I'm 43 now, and in the first 41 years of my life, I spent all of my time around artists, and none of them could do art full time as a career. They all had some other side gig. In the last 2 years, I've now got, developed dozens and dozens and dozens of friends who are making a living full time on their art through this new economy, right? Through NFTs and blockchain. So it's a really exciting space, and excited to talk about that.
Yeah, so Jason, let's welcome and let's unpack that a little bit while we have you on. Can you describe what that last sentence looks like for these creators? What does making an income, making a livelihood look like in the world of NFTs when you step away from the big, narrative inducing or narrative consuming 70 million buys?
Sure. So there's actually the problem with the traditional art market, in my opinion. I always describe it as a ladder with one rung at the top, right? There's no way for people to work their way up. You're either one of the chosen ones, or you're kind of out of luck, right? So what we have now at multiple levels, we have people that are selling works initially for maybe $5 to $10 to $15 that are just getting started. And you don't hear about that because if Amit buys a work by Jason for $15, the news people don't come running, right? But that's happening in high volumes, across the world right now with artists that are able to participate across these markets. And then you have a range where people that started at that point, maybe a year or two ago, are now, as of yesterday, being shown at Sotheby's, right? So, so it's literally this success story of people that started out working hard, selling their work, and there's a certain amount of sort of self-promotion that comes along with this, but that's what happens when you're no longer depending on an intermediary. So anyone can start sharing their work. With patience, you usually start to find your, sort of who your collectors are. And we're seeing literally dozens and dozens of artists who, were pretty much unknown, as recently as 6 to 12 months ago, who are now, the large auction houses are clamoring to try to get them to be able to auction off their works. Now, that's not, in my opinion, the end game. The end game isn't how do we get the old system to pay attention. It's how do we build our own system independent of that, right? So we're seeing that on these decentralized platforms where artists don't need to depend on a Sotheby's or a Christie's to go off and sell their work. So I would say there are artists who, I collected for tens of dollars a year or two ago, who are now untouchable for anything less than tens of thousands of dollars, and they're able to live off of that. And they've set out a clear path for younger artists who are just coming in. Will every artist become, self-sufficient and be able to live off their art? Probably not. I'm not sure that there's a system that gets us there. But have we started a new decentralized system where, it's open to a much larger group of people from around the world? That's already happened, and the story's just not being told as well as I think it should.
Yeah, and it's happening on both sides, right? Because people are getting to participate in art in a way that they couldn't earlier, right? There's this genuine democratization that is starting to happen. Bernardine, you come at this, philosophically, surely on the same side, but in practice, you are coming from the side of bringing
Establishment.
from the establishment. And do you see that? Do you see it in a way that it's let's get the establishment to pay attention, kind of like Jason said, the opposite of, or are these things going to work together where you can run in parallel and intertwined at the same time? Because one of the principles I use in the decentralized world is that disruption is a collaborative sport. Right.
Absolutely. I think that collaborations are essential to this, to the growth of this space. And Jason and I are actually working on a few projects together with some of the establishment figures on how to disrupt those practices. But I think that why people buy NFTs is greatly also the transparency of them. So you can connect with the artist on social media and have a conversation with them. I know collectors who own NFTs who are delighted that they can be in touch with the artists that they're collecting. But furthermore, artists are able to see the public wallet addresses of people who own their work, and they might even airdrop an artwork to the collectors to say thank you. And so I think it's that community side of things that people often forget about. And one of the most important elements that's disruptive about this is that the artist resale right, the droit de suite in French, is actually not global. It's only really in certain geographies. But what it actually does is it helps artists receive ongoing income from the resale of their works. And what the community has done is integrate that resale into the smart contract standardization that has happened. And that ensures that even for the artists, if their works don't sell for millions today, if they do one day, their originating wallet will get a percentage of that income.
I think that is absolutely fantastic because many times we think about the creator as being an individual and one person. And if you think about high quality, video art, shorts, movies, what have you, the real ID and provenance of that goes across potentially tens, hundreds of people who touch that production, right? And this idea that way after this is not in the center of the attention universe anymore, right? Those wallets could still be receiving income because it was used in an ad at one point, or because it was used, in as part of a movie at one point, right?
Yeah, and I think it touches on what Greg was talking about with the new economies that we're trying to create by establishing the global IDs of your property. So this whole, and what you also mentioned in your talk, right, about Web3 and how we reassert our ownership of our digital assets, and that we should earn the money from those digital assets, whether that's our persona or our art or our creations, whatever it is, it's not owned by Facebook or Google or Amazon.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could bring Greg in here very quickly, because I think, to the point that Bernadine just made, at the end of the day, it comes back down to your sovereign ID, your self-sovereign ID, and the ability to, have that as the base for this new economy that we're creating. All of the new monetization models will come from knowing that, we have the ability to own our identity, and all of the value that brings, whether it is because we're creators, because we're generating data points, because we're influencing creators or influencing data points, that is an important starting point, because if we keep that centralized, it's much harder to operate in a decentralized commons revolution, correct?
Yeah, I was talking to the director producer of a movie called The Accountant. It had Ben Affleck. I had no idea that movie didn't do very well in the box office, but it's actually the most rented movie in history. And the amount of residuals he got from that is zero. And the reason there's no The Accountant 2 is until he figures out how to do this as like a equivalent of an NFT, where he's going to have an embedded contract that he's going to get a portion of ticket sales, whether in box office or whatnot. Because right now that was all eaten up by an intermediary, a Netflix or one of the other distributors. And he knows that movie is going to sell. And you could sell the tickets to that movie before it's even made. And so this flattening of the world, it doesn't mean that the intermediaries are going to go away. But if there's another method to discover the artist's work, you can really split the value of discovery from the value of creation, from the value of distribution. And it used to be the distributor bought the creative work, controlled the discovery, and that was it. It was in that silo. And that model can still be there. But when I'm looking for a particular song, I don't want to have to know that it's in Spotify's silo or somebody else's. I just want to find the song. And probably the best place to find the song is like through the artist or the creator's name. And why should that creator be disconnected from the value stream simply because that value stream is controlled by the distributor? And so with a smart contract now, you can divide the rights for the resale, the reuse, and the artist can negotiate. It can give a reward to a distributor, first tier, second tier. All of that can be embedded in a smart contract. And the payment rails, once again, if every identity has a wallet, you can direct connect between the payor and the payee, the creator and the spectator. It's a very flat world, but that flat world doesn't have to be academic. It doesn't have to be hard to use. That's the amazing thing that we're seeing now. And I think Jason's point, just like artists can really make money now because the intermediaries are cut out. The discovery is possible. It is an amazingly different world today than it was 5 years ago. And I do feel like we're in the first inning and we're just getting started.
Bernadine, you wanted to pipe in here.
Yeah, I think maybe I wonder about the word flat, because I kind of see where you're going with that, about the fact that it's kind of equal, or somehow that everyone has the same opportunities. But I think it's a complete tapestry of different people, and there's no flatness in what I'm seeing, and there are new intermediaries coming out, right? So you have people that are helping curate collections for people, because there are so many NFTs to discover. There are people educating on how to set up a crypto wallet. That was a job that never existed before. So that's what I'm wondering. What exactly is the flatness?
So just to give an example, when people used to search for things on Craigslist, you had to search city by city by city. Like if you were searching for a rare car, you'd have to search in San Francisco, then in Texas, because they controlled the search engine. Google could only take you to Craigslist, and then you had to have a search engine within that. And if somebody like me scraped all that data, put it in a master database, so you could search across those silos. Or if you wanted to search across Craigslist and eBay, guess what? You get sued under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act as a hacker, and you're going to jail, right? And so in this world, when I say flat, I mean, it's possible for those search engines to work and find data directly. You don't just get directed to a site, which happens to be the distributor, and you have to use their search engine. You can get to the content directly. I don't mean everybody's equal, every artist is equal, but I mean, you don't necessarily have to rely on a series of vertical, integrated, siloed methods to get connected with the content that you're looking for. That's what I mean by flat.
Well, the reality is four-dimensional is the new flat in a sense, right? I think flat is a philosophical flat, you mean, rather than, a geometric flat. So that definitely makes sense. Before we go to Gunther, I want, and Gunther, just so you know, I want to come to you on two areas that you have incredible expertise. One is on the legal side, and two is on the financing side, on the investment side, because I think the monetization models are deeply tied to that. But sticking with what we were talking about, and this is for all three of you, and I'll go one by one. It seems like, and you mentioned this a little earlier, the replacement or the transformation of the intermediaries, because it feels like this is a new ecosystem play, right? Some of the old traditional actors are being replaced by kind of these new roles. The fact that we've democratized the ability, Jason, like you were saying, for the creator, for the artist to be able to put their work out, it isn't as simple as that, because there is a huge, platforming. The influencer part needs to be done. The ones that are, can sell well are going to sell better, right? So tying that into the fact that we're talking about new monetization models, it seems to me that if you're not a creator or a buyer, you have an equally important role to play in this new evolving ecosystem, because you can be an influencer, you can be an amplifier, right? You can be, like Bernadine said, a curator. right? You can be the platform that makes it easier for people to find the kind of NFTs that interest them, align them to their values, right? I look back and I think, wow, the internet wasn't just about AOL, right? The internet wasn't just about eBay. And eBay is a great example, Airbnb, it's suddenly like it unlocked so many service providers because of that platform, because of that ecosystem. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that. And maybe we can unpack a few of those opportunities for everyone listening. So why don't we start with you, Jason?
Sure. So I think we're talking about what new sort of careers or opportunities pop up for people that maybe don't consider themselves artists in sort of this new space. I will say, when we started as a super altruistic bunch 4 years ago, our vision, mine included, and I was wrong, was that we were going to completely remove all middlemen. So if you think about cryptocurrency, the idea was remove banks, remove credit cards, right? And when I would advise platforms and artists, my vision 4 years ago was every artist will have full 100% control over the sales of their own art and won't need anyone else. Well, we've seen platforms like, Super Rare and Known Origin and things like that pop up. And what I was missing is that if you're an artist and no one's buying your work today, and then you tokenize it, no magic happens, right? Where people come running in to buy your work that weren't buying it before. So you still need some level of promotion and some visibility and eyes. And I do think we have new exciting tools that people can use to promote themselves, but people land on different areas of that spectrum on how much time they want to spend doing that, how comfortable they are doing that. I kind of try, as someone from sort of the community, I try to encourage folks to actually thoughtfully and genuinely promote each other's work, because I think that's a more successful system in the long term than people kind of trying to tout their own work as loud as they can. But when I talk about these tools, even before the NFT space, I think about how with my blog, right, 50 years ago, I would have had to, if I wanted to float an idea into the world, I would have either had to go through some sort of traditional academic route where I would get permission to, okay, these ideas are good, these ones aren't, now you get published. But with ArtGnome, as an example, I spent a weekend writing about blockchain and art. 2 days later, I was the first thing that people all around the world saw if they searched blockchain and art, right? A year after that, I sat down with Kyle Waters, a data scientist friend of mine. We wrote a new theory about why Van Gogh's colors in his paintings shifted from dark brown to yellow. It's now the dominant theory in the world on why that happened after a couple of hours. Why? Because I didn't have to ask permission and say, do you, the elites in the academic space or these other people, give me permission to float these ideas out in the world? Tools like Google, and Google's not perfect, but they open up the ability for individuals, whether it's writing or art or these things, to really get their ideas out in a way where they don't need permission. They really don't, and sure, it helps to be able to promote yourself a little bit, but I'm sort of a living example of that. And now I'm surrounded by creatives that have extended that.
Yeah, that's great. Bernadine, coming to you, in the interest of saving the future of the NFT art world, I'm never going to be a creator because that would end people's interest in art. But
maybe you've got a secret talent, Amit. No, I think one interesting thing that people often don't talk about with NFTs is that actually the NFT is just the token that represents the art. The art isn't even on usually, unless you're buying like a specific like autoglyphs or something like that, the art is not on the blockchain. So you have other services like Arweave and IPFS where the images and the data is stored that the token references. So I think that is one area where we need a lot of support to make sure that those pieces are stored for a certain level of permanence and that we have a high resolution copy of these artworks that is accessible. And I think that the other area where I think there is quite a lot of innovation to be had is Jason was a huge champion of generative art, which is art that uses AI. And it uses source files to create new images. And I think that evolution and the way that those source files are referenced and that we can kind of unpack that black box of how things reference each other. That's another area I think that a lot of innovation can still be done. And that very much relates to this kind of decentralized economy that still hasn't been unlocked.
Yeah, that, Bernadine, honestly, is my best chance at art. My AI background. Greg, any quick thoughts
I just
on?
want to make sure that Gunther's been so patient over there.
Oh, I'm going to
Did you
Gunther
want to
next,
jump in?
and we're going to be talking about a bunch of things. But Greg, very quickly,
All right.
do you
Well,
see an
the
unlock?
one observation I wanted to make is,
Please go ahead, go ahead, Greg.
well, the one observation is, yeah, I like you, am not a great artist, but my daughters seem to be knocking the stuff out. And so the point is, like with the movie, there's all sorts of people, like the actors in the movie can promote the movie. Oprah can promote the movie. She just needs to have, like, say something on Instagram or Twitter. And as long as that thing, like you said, is sitting on IPFS and the contract is there and it's authenticated and the rights are there, you're off to the races. Again, it doesn't mean that Netflix is going away. It just means there's a new model around. As long as you can do discovery, whether through Google or through influencers or wherever you find like out about it, that goes direct, that becomes the distribution channel, right? And so, and the discovery channel. And now all you're left with is the smart contract to say who gets what, how much money goes to the creator, how much goes to the influencer that found that. And again, you're off to the rails. And again, if we all have a digital wallet, it's not clear that that needs to go through the banks or through the card companies. I'm sorry, those rails, they're there. This may not be at current throughput speeds the most efficient, but to Jason's point, you didn't have to ask permission. And so that is really the radical democratizing element, is you don't have to ask permission. And it doesn't matter that it's not the most efficient or even the cheapest. You get a different kind of information when you don't have to ask permission. You might even ask, what is innovation, when you have to ask permission? That's a very narrow definition. And so we're on the cusp of discovery here, because
Yeah. And I think that when I hear words like "don't have to ask permission," I have to ask Gunther to unmute right then, because
he's sitting
now
over there and I'm looking at him, and that's why I was.
Yeah, now we're getting to a very interesting part of all of these new opportunities and monetization models, which is the legal frameworks that exist today and the legal frameworks that will need to exist tomorrow to adapt to this world that is starting to evolve. So, I want to give you plenty of time now, Gunther, because we're getting into areas where you have an incredible amount of not just expertise by profession, but also exposure by what you've seen evolving around you. And you've seen this evolve, if not in NFTs, certainly in the world of the ICO and the different protocol foundations and all of what we've seen evolve there. So when you listen to these, when you see what's happening in the market, and you listen to Bernadine and Greg and Jason talk about their excitement as creators and curators in this opportunity, what are the red flags that start showing up right away, saying, yeah, this is all good, but hold on a second, right? Maybe starting with the idea of permission.
That's an easy one, huh? No, I mean, first of all, it's amazing just to listen to everybody share their stories. And I think the one common theme is that we really don't know, right? We have feelings, we kind of see where stuff is going, but we really don't know. I think I feel reminded of the internet in the late 90s. There was no Google, there was no Facebook. There was a lot of companies that got really big names that nobody knows today anymore, right? And with the exception of Bernadine, I think we're kind of the same age, which is good because usually I'm feeling old. But it's kind of like that, right? In 1999, I had no idea what an eBay and Amazon would ever be and what they would ever do. Those markets didn't exist. Some people were hacking away in the background, but I had no view of them being in those beautiful little mountains here. But I think we're kind of on the same position right now. I think we have no idea where this NTF is actually going to lead us, but it's going to change everything. If you look into the music space that has been mentioned, or that I would like to mention as one art market. I mean, this is a very simple market right now, which is basically non-digital, right? If you look into the big publishing houses or companies out there running the rights of artists, I mean, they're essentially, again, I don't have the numbers, but I'm just saying 80% legal and auditing or contracting. They're not about creating new music and putting it out anymore, because it doesn't work like that anymore. And all I have to do is look at my little son who's 12 years old, and he comes into my office and there's 10,000 vinyl records up on this little wall, right? And he literally at some point went there, took one out and said, "What is that?" I said, "Well, it's a record." He said, "Well, what is a record?" I said, "Well, it's, something where you have a song on." He said, "Well, why would you do that? Isn't that like, And then he was quoting all of the tools he has on his cell phone. And I realized he's not buying a record or the entire collection of an artist. He's basically going by songs which Spotify is getting to him and so forth. So now what you have, and that is the interesting part, which I would like to come to with the artists we're working on, is they really, I mean, they're big names and you will hear them in the next couple of weeks and months. They're quite well known, but they had a really bad 18 past months, right? Because they haven't been able to go out, perform, do anything. They've been doing some kind of little shows and so forth. But interestingly now with Instagram, Facebook and so forth, they're creating a connection with their fan base, right? And they are now using NTFs and so forth to put out their product to their fans. And they're starting to interact directly. So the question that came with many of them is, well, why do I actually need a record company, right? What is the purpose of this, that, and the other when I can do it directly? Again, we have no answers to that. We're just trying to do that, in this case, in the artwork. Now to your actual question. So, I don't know. It's just what's happening. To your actual question, I think the really important thing is the difference between regulation and non-regulation, right? And there's a lot of innovation out there. And all we can hope for is long enough non-regulation so that it really develops. Because the moment you get regulation in there, you have a problem. Because when something is really revolutionary new, you're starting to regulate cars with horse rules. And this is what you saw in the UK, right? Sorry, Bernard, it's not about the UK, it's just history. But in the 1890s, they were putting out red flag regulation, which meant that every car has to have people with red flags on it. They were basically meant to get off the car and walk around it once you got into the vicinity of any kind of livelihood. So it's very important to get kind of right when you start to do that. And why is that? Because most of the technology we talk about today is decentralized. But all of the thinking we have in terms of regulation, that is always regulated centrally. It's about how do I regulate one person, one entity, one whatever, and I cannot regulate anything where people are sitting in 25 countries, where it's very difficult to do that. So that is the big challenge we're seeing today. Now, final sentence on crypto, I think we've seen some of that. So we've been helping the first Swiss bank to get regulated, asset managers and all of those guys. Is anybody happy about that? I would say, well, yes, but in reality, no. But it's just what he had to do because they were starting to touch onto the classical space where regulation is needed. Now, when we talk about NTFs, to a large part, there's basically no regulation right now, leaving aside US and so forth. So this is what's interesting people. And this is what basically creates all of the stuff we're seeing today, which is really, really just amazing.
Is that I don't know, is that a good thing that NFTs don't have a regulatory framework right now and everyone wants to play? I mean, I would imagine, Bernardine, for someone like you, you welcome the idea of regulations. I always look at it from an investor's perspective. I'm happier investing in a space that has known regulations, even if I don't like them particularly, than unknown regulations, because that's too much uncertainty, right? And I look at someone like you who comes from the connection of the establishment to this opportunity in the decentralized world of Nifties. And I'm sure as Vastari, you're thinking, I'd love to have a clear understanding of the frameworks, not just in the UK, but globally.
Yeah, I think in terms of building businesses, you need to have some sort of stability. And that is what regulation provides to a certain extent, is that you know what you can expect. But at least there are many laws that already apply to NFTs, regardless of how you are working with them. For example, copyright law stands the same, whether it is an NFT you are buying or a painting. You do not get the copyright of the work. You still need the artist's permission to create any products or to publish it anywhere. It is simply that you are buying that specific item. And copyright law translates into the new technology very well.
I'm sorry to interrupt you there, Bernadine, because I want to quickly unpack that copyright piece, because that's super interesting. That in the world of NFTs can be programmed into the NFT, that permission, right? Because that permission can be tied to economic models.
Absolutely.
So interesting, right?
Yeah, so the standard contract does not include copyright permission, but there are artists who are deciding to provide copyright with the artwork as well. And then there was this really famous example because some museums have made their images Creative Commons Zero licenses, which means that you're allowed to use them for anything, because they're out of the copyright time period of 80 years, and the museums believe these images are owned by everyone, so they should be able to be used. And there was an organization on OpenSea called Global Art Museum that tried to mint some of these works and tried to sell them. And there's no regulation to stop that from happening. But the market almost self-regulated itself, because firstly, they didn't sell. There wasn't any real value to buying a JPEG that someone had downloaded from the internet and put as an NFT. It had no validation from the museums. It was not, then there is no authenticity to that token. So that was the first thing. It kind of self-regulated. And secondly, on social media, you had an uproar. So anyone who was seen to buy that token would have been seen as a bit silly. So you don't need governments to get involved if the infrastructure of the technology creates good behavior. And I guess personally, I like the concept of there being some technology that is transnational, because personally, I don't identify with any specific nationality. My parents are Dutch. I grew up in the Dominican Republic. I live in London. I have no specific nationality, and the concept of there being rules that are kind of global appeals to me. So, yeah.
So, Gunther, coming back to you on that, though, is that something that you think there are aspects of, whether it's the copyright law, whether it is the, let's just say the international commerce piece of the world of NFTs, that apply today already? Or is this an area where you think we need attention from regulatory bodies, or there will be, whether we like it or not?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the first place is, of course, dealing with the issues of capital gains tax for people who want to take money out of cryptocurrencies that have appreciated immensely over the past few years. And there are just these huge liabilities for people who want to take the money out. And I think that we need to address that, because it's not truly money laundering, because no one expected these values to rise so exponentially. And that is another reason I am sure that the NFT market has grown so much, because people have assets to spend.
Sure, and that's from we'll actually. I want to come to the income tax side of this, or the capital gains side of this. But Gunther, going to you on this question, if you can address, what I asked earlier.
Well, yes and no. I mean, obviously, there's kind of the global kind of mindset, copyrights being obviously one of them, and so forth, which, yes, one way or the other, have to be integrated into this new regime. But otherwise, I think in large parts, we have to create new legal systems. I'm a lawyer, right? So it's very difficult for me to think about that even in this way. But we see it starting, right? How you ever want to go after anybody who launched an NTF? I mean, you could go after an entity or so forth. That is not the idea. So I think a lot of it will happen. Will we have one set of rules globally? No, definitely not. We've never seen that in anything. But kind of 3, 4, maybe 5 blocks will emerge. Do I know what they look like? No, honestly not. It's still too early for that. Again, leaving aside some of the key points that have been mentioned, such as copyrights and taxes and so forth. But again, I think that's kind of where we're coming in. Again, it's a freak show. Let's be very honest, right? It's we are the early adopters in this and the helpers in this world. So we also can help them in this realm.
Yeah, and there was so much of we can draw to your last point, right? We can draw parallels to just crypto in general, right? Look at the evolution, both of market forces and market behavior. Free market.
Bad day today, by the way, right?
Right, exactly. And then you see kind of the evolution of the regulatory frameworks have been more nonlinear than the price of Bitcoin is over the past 12 years. It's amazing. There's some that have taken.
Just don't forget that Bitcoin was meant to do away with it. No banks, it's e-money from me to you, end of story. We don't need any of that stuff. It kind of started at the end of the last financial crisis. Nobody was thinking about regulation ever. Huh?
That's exactly right. And I think that's what happens. And like I have a not a mixed view. I think I have this idea that we can have two conflicting ideas in our head at the same time, and that's okay. It doesn't make us like, oh my gosh, you cannot agree with a Democrat and a Republican at the same time in the American context. Like, we can have two contrasting opinions. And for me, it's that the regulatory frameworks will evolve as much as we want decentralization to evolve into the hands of the people, and yet
I agree, but you're obviously thinking with an institutional investor, almost institutional investor mindset. Now, obviously, we want to get to that point. We want the institutional money that gets allocated to this kind of asset class, if that's what you want to call, who have a kind of process that they go through before they allocate money. I think it's too early for that, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm the lawyer here, right? But still, I think we're in the very early days, and right now we just need to build the industry to a level where it does make sense, right?
Right.
Strange. I know it's more Jason's and,
yeah,
Greg's, and obviously Bernardine's kind of,
I'm very glad that this is being recorded, because we're going to have like 4 creator side people talking about how we do want a framework in place, and the lawyer goes, no, just go on and play, and one day we'll deal with it. And that's, we'll come to it. Greg, I know you wanted to opine.
Not what I said, by the way.
Greg, go ahead.
I was the chief risk officer for Ripple back in 2013, and now 8 years later, we're being sued for having created a security. The first lawsuits are starting for NFTs, with people claiming that they're securities. And so, what is an NFT? Is it a security? Is it a security if you fractionalize it? Once it becomes a security, does that mean you have to have proof that you didn't sell it to an American? Because evidently Americans, we can't tell the difference between gold and a gold mine. So we think when we get a diamond ring for an engagement that we're getting an investment share in De Beers, in a diamond company, right? And so all of that is now a felony offense. And so this is creating a cloud over NFTs, because we are seeing the first lawsuits with people claiming, I didn't understand. I didn't know that when I bought this, that this was really a security. This is an investment contract. And therefore, that's a whole nother level of litigation. I thought it was bad enough when we got fined for being a currency, and then we were told by the IRS a commodity. Now we're a security. I guess it's like in physics. You're a gas, a liquid, and a solid all at once. And so that's not possible in physics, but here you can get punished for being everything at the same time. And right now, I think just this last week, we started seeing the first NFT lawsuits as to whether it is a security or not. And so that kind of, it would be great if there was clarity. I have to say, I'm going to feel very unhappy if NFTs are deemed to be securities, because the world's going to get a lot more complicated. And I hate to think of like Frank Miller, we're doing Sin City, we're doing a NFT for between Concept Art House and Gala Games. He's a well-known artist for all that. And if I had to tell him, dude, you're going to have to go to the SEC because you're creating a security. That's not the.
Yeah. So this is I'm glad you brought this up, Greg. It's really where I want to go with the next part of this conversation. Bernardine, when the tape puts one of its big artists on show, or more importantly on sale, what is that art? What would you characterize it as, or what does the industry characterize it right now?
Well, I think the debate about whether NFTs are an investment product is really interesting, because people have been debating that about art for the past years, right? About, is art an asset class or not, and trying to define it. And now this is happening with NFTs as well. And I think it depends on the context. So if you look at a large museum like the Tate or the Whitney, etc., they will never earn from the proceeds of the value appreciation that happens from them exhibiting the art. And so it shows that there is no conflict of interest. So at Vastari, for example, we have never sold art because we only facilitate its exhibition, which has a huge impact on its value, right? So you have to be at an arm's length from the commercial art market. And this is not because of regulation. I haven't been told. There is a code of ethics of museums that governs museums in general, but it's not necessarily a government regulation. I think in the case of looking at securities, what's interesting is what's being done with NFTs. So not just the fact that I'm minting something, but that there are these big funds that are taking NFTs and putting them and selling shares into their portfolio of NFTs. That to me is more like an investment proposition. They're not, but then you could say that wine funds are securities and all of these types of things. People have been playing around with what they've what people can invest in for a long time.
Yeah, and Jason, as the artist in this, when you listen to this conversation, how do you react to this, and how do you view the art that And I want to make an argument that it can be both at the same time, depending upon how it's being used, right? So, what's your take on it?
I think right now that people tend to follow the money, and for 4 years nobody cared what we were doing because there wasn't a lot of money there, right? And then in the last 2 weeks, I've had conversations with a few tax experts because I have to figure out how to manage that. And there's a lot of people, grappling from the art side on how they manage that. And I've actually been served from a lawyer about some potential trademark infringement in a work that I've created, right? So none of that has happened prior over the last 4 years because nobody was looking there, right? So we are seeing regulators start to come into the space. I think for me, and I'm not like an expert in prohibition, but I kind of look at it is, are we going to see something like prohibition where people try to regulate something that is essentially unregulatable, right? So when we look at Bitcoin, a lot of its features and the way it was designed was to try to be unregulatable, right? So to what degree can we see regulation, come in, and what kind of impact can it have? I know whenever we see stories come about around regulation, the crypto markets kind of tank, right? That might be part of what's driving what we're seeing today. But I don't necessarily hate the idea of regulation. I think in some ways, artists and regulators sort of complete each other, or innovators and regulators complete each other. There's nothing to regulate without people kind of pushing the boundaries, right, to see where they can go. And I think having some guardrails to protect us from ourselves and to make sure that we're creating something that can scale isn't necessarily the worst thing. So I think we're all sort of playing our roles here, right? Where some people are I'm very comfortable sort of in the Wild West, pushing the boundaries of what can be done. And that's where I like to live. People are like, aren't you scared? And I'm like, no, I mean, the cake's not baked yet. We're in kind of the screechy modem days, like the early 90s, when there's always going to be people that want to be out on that edge. That's invigorating and exciting. That's where the innovation is. But that also creates an entire cottage industry for people that want to come in and regulate, right? So it's a bit of a cat and mouse game, I think, that way.
Would you be bummed? Do you think the industry would lose its excitement and the essence of what it can be if NFTs are deemed to be securities, not just in the US, which deems everything to be a security because that's just easy, right? When in doubt, use a Reg S or a Reg D or a Reg CF exemption because you're a security. But from your perspective as the artist, does that change trajectory of ethos for you?
Not so much, because I think of the art community. So I think there's almost a generational thing here, right? Where there's a younger generation that wants to build this new art world. And it's a bit like a hydra where you could chop off the head of one of the heads or whatever, but another one's going to sprout right back up, right? So, if the entire next generation wants to build a new system that's more equitable for creatives, then, I don't think the regulation, I kind of compare it to The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. I don't know if people that have seen that movie, but when the Grinch steals all the presents, he kind of listens because he wants to hear all the Who's crying the next day. but instead they're all singing, right? Because, you know, their mission goes beyond just the present. So we think about how in 2018, when the crypto markets all crashed, right? People that were all negative about it were like, see, where are you now, you creatives and artists? You must be miserable. And we were all like, no, we're thrilled. Like, we've got all these great creative friends and we're building new systems, and the bear market doesn't really bother us that much, right? So when you've got a large driven community like this that borders almost on religious, I think you can regulate aspects of it, but it's going to be like whack-a-mole. New things will pop up, and we'll just carry on.
Yeah. So let's talk about one of those aspects of regulation, not from the SECs or the FINRAs or FINMAs of the world, but actually from the tax authorities of the world, right? Bernadine, is art that I create, a terrible example, we established that, is art that Jason creates and then sells, curated by Bastari, maybe on a third-party marketplace, income to anyone in that provenance stream?
So I'm going to try and unpack that question, because I'm trying to understand. So we are working on NFTs that will have many different beneficiaries. Mm-hmm. And so each person will have to pay their taxes based on that. I think one thing that is becoming quite important in the art world is anti-money laundering regulations. Sure. There is new regulation in EU that's affecting all of the arts, in that any transaction over $10,000 needs to have KYC AML checks. Ew. And you need to know if the person is a PEP. So I think that will apply to any situation like this as well.
Let's say, sorry to interrupt you, but let's say that there's one artist with Jason, right? Bastari curated that art and made it available to a buyer, whoever that buyer might be. We'll unpack that buyer in a second. The income that comes to Bastari and the income that comes to Jason, what is it qualified as?
I think maybe Gunther will know better than me, but the way that I think of it is that as long as it's still cryptocurrency, it's kind of still outside of the people are
income tax regimen.
At least people are not necessarily declaring it always. But when they want to then have it in fiat currency, they are declaring it. However, I do know some collectors.
That's not the way it works.
No, I was just thinking about it as well. I'm part of that younger generation that doesn't know as much about this. But in the States, I've spoken to museum trustees who do declare it and who are actually trying to donate cryptocurrency to museums in order to offset some of the liabilities, et cetera, right? So in the US, it's very specific. But I think that, sorry, I'll stop talking because I'm not an expert in this.
Well, why don't we move to Greg? I know you wanted to say something, and Gunther, I want to come to you on this. In the example that I gave, what form of income is it? Is it capital gains? Is it an asset sale? Is it income tax?
Hey, look, back in the day, you used to trade like a Bitcoin for an Ether, for an XRP. You know, those things were moving around all the time. And you used to say, look, I understand it's an asset, and when I take it out in fiat, I'm going to have to pay tax on the gain. Mm-hmm. Now the IRS is coming back and saying every single one of those trades you did, every time you moved anything, that's a taxable event.
Yeah.
You have one piece of art, there's another piece of art, you guys swap it. Guess what? You're both getting a tax bill, right? Like, it's all money all the time. Anytime there's an exchange, you have to go back to what was at the base. And
wouldn't you agree, Greg?
It's all money.
That is fair.
Well, so the part to me that doesn't feel like it's fair is you do all that, but then you won't let you use it as if it's money, because then now it's something like, so if you could do all that and then they would say, okay, it's money, that'd be different. If you swap, if you go in and you like buy Singapore dollars and then you come back and go the other way, if it's fiat to fiat and you make a gain, you don't have to pay a profit on that. So they're saying it's value, but it's not money, and money gets a hall pass, but any other asset that's value doesn't. Then you're sort of creating this tiered system of like money versus like stable coin versus like crypto. versus now gold versus now art. And
Right.
it's very, very slippery. And so with derivative contracts and all those other things, you're in a world of hell. And all I know is every day I live in fear that there's going to be a knock on the door and somebody with a badge and a gun is going to say, you didn't do it the right way. And like, look, these rules weren't even in existence back there when I did all these trades. And they're like, hey, we got a time machine, you know, we're taking you back there and we're going to bust you. Like, you know, so I do feel that like, if you're going to be in this market, you know, no matter how slavish, how many tax lawyers you hold, you're going to get in trouble. But you know, I'm used to being in trouble. Get in line. There's a line for all the people that want to sue me that I didn't do the accounting right. And you know, if that was going to stop me, I wouldn't be on this panel.
Yeah, well, you know, and when that happens, you need the gentleman on the screen to your.
And the real thing is, you just have to die before the line gets to you, right? Like,
Yeah.
and then it's your state's problem, right? So,
Gunther, both in terms of this specific conversation, you know, have you come across, from your practice perspective, this debate of, you know, what is the recognition of that income? Is it going to come under capital gains treatments? Is it going to come under, and I know you're not a tax specialist, but from a legal perspective, is this starting to rise to the top? Because the other piece I want to connect your answer to is, how does this fit into your old world, which is the venture world, the investing world, right? Because, you know, investing into art as an asset from a fund like Metaverse did with that Big People sale, does that come under ordinary, normal venture world investments, ergo, you know, carried interest to capital gains, or is that going to be treated differently?
Yeah, it does, but not in a super big way, to be honest. But first, people are asking questions, obviously, around that. Now, when you think about funds, to be honest, I did not do any art investment, right? We were really technology and technology only focused, so that wasn't really a brink. So you need to kind of know what you're doing there. And then, yes, I guess those questions, they are vital. Now, I'm not aware of a lot of European funds in this space, so I assume most of them are offshore based and so forth, or US based. And I guess the people doing it, they know what they're doing, or at least have a very good insurance.
Yeah. So, you know, we have about 12 minutes left. And one of the things I thought that would be really interesting to do is to, you know, go through a practical example. And I'm going to lean on each of you layer by layer to unpack and unlock monetization models, right from the creator, the Jason who starts creating the art, the, you know, curation that, you know, you're bringing in, Bernardine, and potentially the marketplace, you know, potentially one of these big marketplaces out there right now, the commons purchases, but also then the fund purchases, the opportunity that then brings to the LPs who might be typical centralized LPs, but guess what? The world is changing, and tokenization now allows, you know, people to come in and say, I really like how Metaverse makes its investments in art. And instead of me going and bidding on different art, whether it is at the price point that Jason mentioned initially across all of these, you know, the collective of creators, or whether it is those one-off peoples, you know, that's a great way for me to get in, and suddenly the threshold is much lower. Let's think about, in the context of new monetization models, next 5 years, what would that look like, right? So, Jason, I'm going to start with you. Let's paint a scenario. So you decide to create some art. Tell me what happens at that point.
Sure. Yeah, I think artists are always creating, and some of the debate within the community is, should you worry about scarcity or about flooding, you know, your market, or
Guys,
should you go with
just to jump in, sorry to jump in, Amit, it's actually, we should have finished right now, in fact, but
okay.
no, but it's fine. I'll let you go on for a couple more minutes, but so if you could do the wrap up from now, that'd be fantastic. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, carry on.
Yeah, no problem. And we'd use this to wrap up. You know, we don't need to revisit stuff that we've already said. Let's all just take, you know, 20 seconds now. And Jason, the art creator.
Keep it fast. Yeah, you make lots of art. You decide within that art you've produced what you think is worth minting, right? And then you have a choice of platforms that you can choose from. Those platforms you choose based on how likely it is to be sold in terms of speed, or how some platforms sell for more or less, or can I adjust what my secondary royalty will be. I click mint, and then I kind of let my community know, hey, I've put this out there. I hope you like it. And that's essentially the starting point.
Okay, super. And so now you need some influencers. You need this word to be spread. Bernadine, what happens?
Yeah, so you'll have people helping spread the word about your art, and there are these collectors who buy the NFTs. Those collectors have that in their wallet, and I think in 5 years' time they will also have spaces where they are exhibiting these works that they've collected, and that will be something that they share with friends and with others to say, this is my NFT collection, look at my newest edition, almost like everyone has their own museum in their wallet. Then they can decide to perhaps lend those NFTs to other virtual museums for exhibitions, right? So then there might be licensing models. If I want to borrow your NFT in my museum space, what do I get paid? And then there are tickets to those museums.
Right. Wonderful. All of this happens because there is self-sovereign ID for everyone in this chain, right, Greg?
Absolutely. And like with that self-sovereign type thing, everybody has an identity. If I'm Ferrari, there's going to be a 5% clause every time that car is resold. So now I'm in a totally different business. It's not just the car that I sell. I have a perpetual revenue flow forever. And so whether you're a Ferrari or an artist, that's a totally different world we live in. The NFT title registry takes over the regular title registry and takes over our concepts of copyright. And it's all about the NFT and what the smart contract was that was embedded in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Rights.
Yeah. Thank you. Last 10 seconds, Gunther. All of this is in a legal contract. You can write it, but it can all be automated and smart contracted. Yes?
Hopefully. So I think my standard sentence is the future will be decentralized. That's the one thing I really believe in. It's starting now. I really don't know where it's going. I think none of us does, but we are all excited about it and just make the most out of it.
Yeah, this is awesome. I can't thank all of you enough. This has been amazingly educational for me, and I've been in the space for a very long time. So hopefully it was incredible for everyone who watched and listened. Thank you for your time. I think at the end of the day, we're looking at an opportunity that is philosophical. We're looking at an opportunity that is built on technological underpinnings that are evolving over time. I think they're built across the interplay and intersection of the establishment and the commons, creators and people who want to back them. And all of this coming together can only be a beautiful thing. And hopefully the regulatory frameworks will evolve with us, not against us. And that means everyone benefits from all of this. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you everyone for listening. Good evening.
Listen, Amit, before you guys go, I have to say, again, just listening and looking at how you guys interacted, really good vibe, and you're absolutely right. Educational, not just for you, but I'm sure for most of us that were tuning in as well. And the great thing is, I'm so glad this was recorded, because there was so much there packed in that we'll all be able to unpack once we watch the recording, once, maybe even twice in the future. So once again, thank you so much, everybody. You looked like you were having fun. You looked like you were actually, each of you, learning something new, which is essentially what we want as well from our panel discussions also. So thank you so much. Right, ladies and gentlemen, guess what? We are here. Not you are, but well, you are. You are with me right here and our crew in Studio 2, and we are about to close the doors, turn off the lights, turn off the cameras here in Studio 2, because we've come to the end of Podim 2021 for this studio before we actually move over to the lobby and the Podim 2021 pitching competition. So, all that leaves me to say is thank you so much for being with me. I'm sure you haven't been with me for the whole 2 days. If you have, that's wonderful. Let me know in the chat. Reach out on LinkedIn and let me know the kind of the opinions of what you thought unfolded here in Studio 2. If you haven't, that's fine as well. But whatever you've been doing, whatever you've been listening to, I hope at least there'll be something in there that will help you to maybe change something differently, perhaps think differently about something, and be more aware of some of the topics that we've been sharing. So all I have to say is over and out. I'll be moving over to the lobby for the first time, meeting the people I've been speaking to for the last 48 hours through this camera. We're going to meet in person in the lobby, and look forward to the finals and finding out who's going to walk away of the startup competition, Podim Startup Competition 2021.